Shocking photos of brutal punishments banned in history books. There have been many bloody periods in human history when torture and executions were shockingly common. These punishments are so scary and strange that they'll give you chills just thinking about them. So let's explore some bizarre, shocking, and cruel punishments in human history. This photograph shows two men holding a large saw positioned vertically between the victim's legs. Sawing was a gruesome method of execution that involved suspending the victim upside down and sawing them in half, starting from the groin. The inverted position ensured a prolonged death, as blood flow to the brain kept the victim conscious and alive longer. This form of torture was used in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East during the medieval period for crimes like blasphemy and witchcraft. The sheer brutality of sawing wasn't just in the act itself, but in the psychological terror of being fully aware as your body was torn apart from the groin to the head. The brutal and deliberate nature of sawing made it one of the most horrific forms of punishment in human history. This device was used to punish women accused of gossiping, nagging, or being outspoken. It was a metal mask or cage that covered the head and had a metal bit inserted into the mouth. The bit was designed to press down on the tongue, making speech difficult and painful. This device was often humiliating, as the woman would be paraded through town while wearing it, sometimes even chained to a post in a public place for everyone to see. The pain, combined with the public shame, made this punishment both physically and psychologically tormenting. This method of punishment was used mainly in Scotland and England from the 16th to 18th centuries. What makes this punishment particularly shocking is how it targeted women for behaviors that were often seen as minor or even natural. Lynching, also known as death by 1,000 cuts, was a brutal form of execution used in China for over 1,000 years. The condemned person was tied to a wooden post, and the executioner would slowly cut away portions of flesh, beginning with non-lethal cuts to prolong the victim's suffering. The process could involve hundreds of cuts, though the exact number varied. In some cases, up to 3,000 cuts were made, though many victims likely lost consciousness or died long before reaching that number. Lynching was reserved for the most heinous crimes, such as treason, patricide, matricide, and the murder of one's master. Women were also subjected to this punishment in certain cases, notably during the Ming Dynasty, when palace women involved in a plot to assassinate the emperor were executed by lynching. The last recorded instance of lynching was in 1905 when Fu Chaolai was executed for murdering his master, a Mongolian prince. The executions were often carried out in marketplaces or near city gates, where large crowds would gather to witness the gruesome spectacle. The punishment by elephant was one of the most brutal and terrifying forms of execution in human history, practiced for over 2,000 years across regions like India, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. The condemned person was tied down on the ground, and then an elephant, a massive and powerful creature, was ordered to step on them. The process was terrifyingly slow and excruciating. Elephants were trained to crush bones and organs under their feet, and the weight of their massive bodies could crush a human to death in minutes. The punishment was not just about death. It was about making a brutal statement and instilling fear. It was a public spectacle meant to demonstrate the absolute power of the ruler or the state. Impalement was one of the most brutal forms of punishment ever used. It involved piercing a person's body with an object such as a sharp stake, pole, spear, or hook. The stake was typically inserted through the rectum or vagina and then raised upright, forcing the person to slowly slide downward due to gravity. This process could take hours or even days, causing unimaginable pain and suffering as the stake gradually impaled vital organs, leading to a slow and agonizing death. Women were also subjected to this horrific fate, especially in cases of adultery or accusations of witchcraft. Impalement was notably used in the Ottoman Empire, where it was reserved for severe crimes like betrayal or rebellion against the state. One of the most infamous users of this method was Vlad the Impaler, a 15th century prince of Wallachia, now part of Romania. Vlad used impalement to enforce his rule and strike fear into his enemies. The last known cases of impalement were reported in the 19th century. Although the practice had largely fallen out of favor by then, it was used in some parts of the Middle East and Africa, often under colonial powers who employed it as a form of extreme punishment to maintain control. Take a look at this photograph. Victims were tied to a large wooden wheel, and their limbs were systematically shattered with a heavy iron bar or hammer. The torture didn't stop there. Once the bones were broken, the wheel was often hoisted onto a post, displaying the agonizing victim for all to see. The aim was not just to kill, but to prolong the suffering. Sometimes, the executioner would ensure the person remained alive for days, left to die slowly from shock, dehydration, or exposure. Historical records show that the breaking wheel was used widely across Europe until the 18th century, making it one of the longest-lasting and most dreaded forms of capital punishment. Victims were made to sit on this sharp, triangular saddle, and sometimes weights were added to their legs, pulling them down and increasing the pressure on their most sensitive areas. The pain was excruciating, and the longer someone was left on the device, the more severe the injuries. In the worst cases, the person could be disfigured or even killed. The torment didn't stop there. Some torturers would add spikes to the device, or light a fire under the victim's feet, causing them to thrash and suffer even more. Even minor criminals could be subjected to the Spanish donkey, making it a feared punishment. The method was so excruciating that it often led to permanent damage, including genital mutilation or death from blood loss, infection, or sheer agony. This punishment was used from the Middle Ages all the way up until the American Civil War in the 1860s. The blood eagle was one of the most horrifying and brutal punishments practiced by the Vikings. The victim, often someone of high status like a king or a noble, was tied down and had their back sliced open to expose the ribs. Each rib was then meticulously separated from the spine with an axe and pulled outward to resemble the wings of an eagle. To add to the agony, salt was sometimes rubbed into the wounds. Finally, the lungs were pulled out through the back, giving the appearance of wings as the victim struggled to breathe. This gruesome torture was not just about pain. It was often a form of execution for those who were deemed honorless, traitors, or enemies who had committed particularly heinous crimes. One famous victim was King Ella of Northumbria, who was subjected to the blood eagle by the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok as revenge for killing their father. This device was inserted into the mouth, rectum, or vagina of the victim. Once inside, the torturer would slowly turn a screw, making the device expand like a blooming flower. The expanding pier would stretch and tear the inside of the body, leading to horrific pain and sometimes even death. This brutal tool was often used during the Spanish Inquisition, particularly on women accused of witchcraft or heresy, forcing them to confess to crimes they might not have committed. The pain was so intense that many victims would say anything to make it stop. Hanged, drawn, and quartered was a gruesome form of execution used for high treason in England. The process began with dragging the condemned behind a horse through the streets to the execution site. Next, they were hanged until they were nearly dead, but not entirely. This was to ensure they stayed conscious for the next part. Their abdomen was then sliced open, and their intestines were pulled out and burned before their eyes. Finally, the victim was beheaded, and their body was cut into 4 parts, which were displayed in different locations as a grim mourning. This brutal punishment was notably used on the gunpowder plot conspirators, including Guy Fawkes, in 1606, who were involved in a failed attempt to blow up the English Parliament. The last person to be fully subjected to this punishment was David Tyree, a Scottish spy during the American Revolutionary War in 1782. The Judas cradle was a horrific form of punishment used during the Middle Ages, particularly in Europe. It was a pyramid-shaped instrument with a pointed tip designed to be inserted into the victim's anus or vagina. The victim would be gradually lowered onto the device, causing excruciating pain as the pointed tip slowly penetrated and tore through their flesh. This torture could last for hours or even days, often resulting in severe injury or death due to infections or internal damage. This punishment was often used on those accused of heresy, witchcraft, or treason. Women were not exempt. They, too, could be subjected to this torment, especially if accused of witchcraft. Immurement is also one of the most horrifying forms of punishment in history, where a person is sealed alive within a confined space, such as a wall, tomb, or box, and left to die slowly. One of the most famous yet disputed cases of immurement is the story of Anarkali, a young woman in the Mughal Empire. According to legend, she was immured for her forbidden love affair with Prince Salim, who later became Emperor Jahangir. It is said that Emperor Akbar, Salim's father, ordered Anarkali to be sealed alive in a wall as punishment, marking her death with a tragic tale of love and loss. Unlike other methods of execution that are quick and direct, immurement prolongs suffering, often leaving the victim to die from starvation, dehydration, or asphyxiation. The agony is compounded by isolation, with the victim often left in complete darkness, unable to move or communicate until death finally comes. This brutal punishment was often reserved for severe crimes. In ancient Rome, for instance, Vestal virgins who broke their vow of celibacy were buried alive because it was forbidden to spill their blood. In medieval Europe, nuns or monks who violated religious vows or were accused of heresy faced similar fates. As recently as the early 20th century, people in places like Persia and Mongolia were still being subjected to this gruesome end. Pona Cully was another incredibly brutal form of execution in ancient Rome, where the guilty person was sewn into a leather sack with a dog, a snake, a rooster, and a monkey. Once inside, the sack was thrown into a river, leading to the person's death by drowning and attacks from the terrified animals. It was last recorded in the 3rd century AD and was revived under Emperor Hadrian as a harsh warning against this grave crime. And that's just one of the many horrifying punishments used throughout history. If you found this as shocking as we did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the darkest corners of human history. Let us know in the comments which punishment you think was the most brutal. Until next time, stay curious.